Hello everybody, my name is Brady and I'm a 19th century American historian and we are back with another React video, and today we're going to be checking out Overly Sarcastic Productions. They've been recommended to me for a while now. I never got around to checking out their stuff until today, but before we get started, I do want to give a shout out to the newest channel members. Thank you to Jace Blackwell, CJ Sutton, and James Sargent. Thank you for becoming channel members, and thank all of you who have become channel members. It's really cool, and if you want to become a channel member, there is a link in the description box to do so, or you can hit that join button if you can see it. I've been told that it's not always there, but there's always the link in the description box below to make it a little bit easier if you're looking for it. So that's a thing. Now, let's get into the main video. So today's video that we're checking out is History Summarized Ireland. Ireland seems interesting. It's always been a place that I wanted to learn more about, but never really knew where to start. I always told myself, yeah, I'm going to learn a little bit more about Irish history. Nothing ever really came of that, but hey, this is a good first step, maybe. Maybe it'll give me an idea as to what parts of Irish history I might be more interested in checking out. As an American, I feel kind of a kinship with Ireland. We have some things in common. The English. And maybe other stuff. So, yeah, this should be a lot of fun. I'm very excited to check this out. And I just realized I have seen these people before. I took an old literature class, and I had to do something on... the class assignment was to read something from Beowulf, and I checked out their Beowulf video. So I do know who they are. I know the art style. This is definitely them. So I have seen them before. Small world or something. I don't know. Let's get this started.
On the surface, the history of Ireland seems like the tale of one island getting beat up for over 1,000 years straight. And, well, that's not incorrect, I'll be honest with you. But from another perspective, it's a story of a unique civilization rising from the intersection of two very different worlds, and then remarkably enduring through centuries of subjugation and hardship. When it's all too common to see entire cultures wiped from existence because of colonial oppression, Ireland is a very hard-fought counterexample.
That is a very good way of introducing it, and I really like that. Ireland, yeah, they did get beat up throughout history. That does seem to be the case, but not all of history is just rah cheering for your country in hindsight. It seems like kind of a shallow way to appreciate history. Just because they lost a lot doesn't necessarily mean that their history is less valuable. It's actually probably even more interesting in seeing how they endure all their struggles. I've always liked that approach to things. As an American, we get a lot of rah moments because we win a lot, but then we feel all weird when we have to deal with the dark side of things. It must be a little bit interesting to be able to approach things from like the downside when it comes to like the military stuff, but at least be able to maintain that cultural element.
See what makes Ireland's history so special, and to learn how Irish cultures survived to the present day, let's do some history. This video is brought to you by Audible. More on that later. Our story begins with the migration of the Celts from Central Europe sometime in the 5th to 3rd-ish centuries BC. Okay, look, it's an ancient migration, all right? Dates are going to be finicky on this one. And they settled on this little island here, which they...
That is a thing with studying ancient history that I always found so difficult. The period I study, I think it's a great balance, being the 19th century, where you have a lot of letter writing, there's a lot of literacy, and there's stuff to work with, but it's not like if you were writing history of like something that happened in the 21st century, where there's often too much information to work with, and it's not like these ancient civilizations where there's not much at all to work with in a lot of cases. So I like that balance. That's why this older stuff is so difficult for me, because it just doesn't seem to have the right balance of amount of information. I admire people who try to uncover stuff in this sort of period. It's just really hard.
named Ada after the goddess Eire,
Eire.
which I maybe said
Ireland.
right. I don't know. I'm just going to try
I
to
see
say
it.
as few Irish names as possible so I don't embarrass myself, which is where we get the name Ireland. And speaking of language, they spoke an early version of Irish, which is a subset of the Gaelic language family, which is a subset of the Celtic language family. Not
Oof.
confusing at all. Though Ireland's didn't have a written literary tradition, the culture
That's new for me. I thought the Celtic and Gaelic. I thought it was all different stuff, but it's like a subset. Okay, learning. Thank you.
venerated storytelling bards, as well as druids, who were priest-like figures that doubled as historians, judges, and even doctors. Another popular
Sick.
profession in Ireland was, surprisingly enough, king, because there was no overarching central authority, so Ireland usually had somewhere around 150 local tuatha that each had their own king. And there were no cities at this point either, so people just clustered into groups on available farmland and got to it. Though Ireland wasn't politically unified, they shared many elements of art and religion, from Celtic knots to Cuchulainn. Irish
That was
mythology
weird.
is rad, and you can see some examples here, but there are also all manner of gods, heroes, and some pretty bonkers magic too. Sadly, we don't have as much information on them as we might like, because the Irish mythological cycle wasn't codified until centuries later, and parts of it have since been lost. Plus, the stories themselves sometimes conflict with one another on account of how regional these oral traditions were. Though we today only know so much about early Celtic Ireland, the picture gets clearer and the culture gets richer with Ireland's second big arrival, Christianity.
So with the early mythology, I can't help but think about like the Greeks and the Romans, and they would often, as these great empires expand, they start bringing in more and more people and often adopt their gods, which causes their, I guess, system of worship to become very convoluted and very just generally difficult, and you'll have these gods maybe know by different names to different cultures, but they're like the same thing, or they'll take like existing gods and be like, they were the same as this one. It's all incredibly complicated, but that's like the thing I think of here, because this is like having, imagine like those civilizations before the Romans come in, and then like this big empire comes in and like sweeps them up, and then it becomes a whole big mess because everybody was developing their own thing independently, and now it's all going to be one thing, and that would be a big mess. I don't know if it necessarily came together. Clearly Christianity is coming into play, and that's going to take a big impact, be a big impact.
Ireland actually got the good end of the deal on this one, because their conversion
for real?
was peaceful and it didn't involve them getting invaded by Rome. Win-win, and quite the opposite in fact, as Irish pirates often found their way to the western coast of Roman Britain. In one instance, a captured young Roman lived in Ireland for 6 years before escaping back to Britain, and after some soul-searching he trained in France to become a priest and set back out to Ireland in the hopes of converting the people to Christianity. Though he wasn't the first missionary to Ireland, this Saint Patrick, as you've probably guessed, was certainly the most consequential. The dates for his life...
It's the guy from the day. Oh, okay. Gotcha. A lot of these saints, I kind of just take their names and their holidays and whatever for granted. So it's kind of big whenever they're mentioned in like a more historical context. Because a lot of the times with stuff that's so ingrained in your culture and it has become so casual, because we celebrate St. Patrick's Day in the U.S., I don't know. It's probably not the same as you do in Ireland. I don't know for sure, but it's fun whenever these things come into play, because I just stop thinking about that sort of stuff. I don't really consider who St. Patrick is. I just think of the day. They're just words. It's not somebody's name when I'm talking about the context of the holiday sometimes,
and career are all over the place, and there's even a theory that Saint Patrick is actually an amalgamation of two different characters, but this show is history summarized, and I am super not qualified to settle very much ongoing debates in the academic historical community. But, well...
That's humble of him. I've heard plenty of this stuff with, I guess, religious figures. You can even go back to, like, Jesus Christ or whatever. Some people have made arguments that some of the things he did was perhaps done by more than one person, or versions of his story are amalgamations of different people. I'm not personally religious, but from an outside perspective, I find that to be very interesting. I think it would be fun to learn how stories like that come about.
What we can say for certain is that he never drove the snakes out of Ireland, because Ireland never had snakes. That's just a very polite code word for pagans. And even that isn't fully accurate. Patrick, buddy, you're killing me here. Because Celtic culture didn't just go away. It's a classic example of syncretism, where the goal is to make two disparate cultures coexist rather than have one completely supplant the other. Latin was introduced, but it was spoken right alongside Irish Gaelic. Monasteries were built all around the island, but they were regionally autonomous. Jesus was the new number one, but the old Irish mythology remained firmly in the popular conscience. Best of both worlds. And the timing of
That's not too bad. That's, you know what? So far, we've only made it a little bit into this, but thus far, Irish history isn't like totally depressing like the rest of history is. So I'm kind of down with this. I know it's going to get worse. I know for a fact it's going to get worse, but this far into the video, it's not too bad.
all this couldn't have been better, because while mainland Europe was splintering out into dozens of Gothic kingdoms in the wake of the Western Roman Empire's collapse, Ireland just got a jolt of new culture to play with and about 400 years of complete peace to refine it. The strongest literary tradition in Europe was made in Irish monasteries, often called scriptoria, where accounts of old Irish mythology were written alongside beautifully decorated manuscripts of the Bible. All around, Ireland was known as the Isle of Saints and Scholars, and it's because of their hard work that so much ancient Latin work survives today. Irish missionaries to Europe even laid the groundwork for Charlemagne's 9th century Renaissance in France. It's also during this golden age that we see and hear two core symbols of Irish culture, the Celtic cross and the harp.
So it makes sense that Ireland would be a little bit more peaceful. The fact that it is in itself kind of an island. It's very close to the modern day like UK, but like it does, the fact that it's on an island would mean like it would be a little bit more of a pain to attack or whatever. It's only natural who is going to be like one of the main antagonists going forward, because it is the most accessible I guess area near them. Of course the English are going to be pain in the ass to the Irish throughout most of their leaning into modern history. I actually don't know exactly when that starts, because my European history is weak.
The cross appears in stone all over Ireland, and it's a perfect visual metaphor for how Celtic Irish culture is literally woven into Irish Christianity. Again, all this while the rest of Europe was having some serious, let's call it growing pains.
Wait, what year is this?
Decentralized in both government and religion, it enjoyed over 4 centuries of peace between the numerous Tuatha and no threat of invasion. Unfortunately, all good things must come to an end, and all shiny things must get raided by Vikings. And speaking of Vikings, though Ireland's didn't quite get hit as bad as the English and Scots one island over, Ireland saw its fair share of coastal looting and burning. Monasteries were an easy target.
I mean, the Vikings would be coming from the, like, northeast? So, I guess you have one bit of land kind of separating the two, and you're not as accessible, right? So, geographically, that seems to work out a little bit better for them.
Target because of their abundance of treasures like gemstone-covered manuscripts and their non-abundance of defensive fortifications. The Vikings did, however, contribute Ireland's first cities of Dublin, Cork, Waterford, and others settled along the island's coasts.
Oh, cool.
And as the Vikings got comfortable in their cities and chilled out enough to stop with the damn raiding all the time, their cities became hubs for trade and production. Ultimately, though, Ireland's much bigger problem for the next 1,000 years would come from right across the channel. And oh golly gosh, would you look at the clock, it's time to complain about England. Woo!
Yes. Okay. England. Yes. I'm kind of down with this. I'm starting to get England a little bit more. I've had a lot of English people comment on my videos and say like negative things about America, and like I get it now, 'cause like you are shat upon all the time by people in Europe. We are like one of the few places where you can be like, at least we're not them. Like, it totally makes sense now. Because everybody over there is like, the British.
Sorry, professionalism. So while Ireland was having a good time minding its own business and not bothering anyone else, the Anglo-Normans came over to establish the Lordship of Ireland, which sounds a lot more, complete than it actually was. England held on to the urban population centers in the east, but because of stuff like wars and plague, it was pretty patchy for the next 5 centuries. But in 1509, Henry VIII became king and decided that he wanted to be a really big deal. So
it had to be him.
Start getting rough. See, Henry converted to Protestantism after he got tired of killing his wives and wanted to just divorce them instead, but Ireland remained firmly Catholic. This displeased Henry, so he made a new push to colonize Ireland, and England made steady progress in beating up on the Irish, taking more and more of their land, and busting down their monasteries and churches. Unsurprisingly, the Irish rebelled. Several times. In the decade after the union of the English and Scottish crowns in 1603, King James confiscated Irish land in the northern region of Ulster to make way for Scottish colonists to start private plantations. And this marks the start of a couple unfortunate defining trends for the next 3 centuries. First is the treatment of Ireland as a subservient colony and the steady seizure of Irish land, and also the persecution of Catholicism through strict social laws.
So, yeah, the breakup in the church is going to be kind of huge for that. And when I think of the Irish, they're one of the big examples where I do think Catholic. In America, a lot of Irish people were kind of persecuted early on because of the fact that they come from a predominantly Catholic place. I think of the Alien and Sedition Acts. That was often, and that was like when John Adams was president, that was used to scare away a lot of pro-French propaganda or whatever. But also, it was used against the Irish as well. And like Catholic European types were generally got a raw deal, and the Irish probably even worse than the French for a lot longer.
In the 17th and 18th centuries, Irish farmers became tenants in their own island, and this process only accelerated with the advent of anti-royalist and Civil War extraordinaire Oliver Cromwell, who murdered his way across Ireland during his War of the Three Kingdoms. More land was confiscated, Catholic Irish were forcibly evicted, and also banned from certain jobs, and for the next 300 years, Ireland was regarded as little more than a conquered colony. Although the anti-Catholic laws were largely repealed by the turn of the 19th century, Ireland was still poorer going into the 1800s than it had arguably ever been, as its production and wealth were systematically siphoned off to Britain. Only the majority British pockets of the island in Dublin and Ulster saw much improvement, and it was these Ulster Irish who spoke for Ireland.
I wanted to see. I was trying to read what
in Dublin and Ulster
that little note at the bottom was. Belfast was and is the largest city in Ulster region of Ireland. Okay, just fun little factoids. Gotcha.
Much improvement, and it was these Ulster Irish who spoke for Ireland in the new United Kingdom's Parliament. If this all sounds short-sighted, exploitative, and extremely fragile, you'd be correct. But wait, it only gets worse. See, Ireland's agriculture was, well, dangerously precarious. Most of their food production was beef exports to Britain, and that didn't leave a whole lot of available farmland on Ireland for feeding the Irish, so the tenant farmers turned to potatoes.
Oh yeah, we have to get to the potato famine. Oh god. And that is one of those things that drove a lot of the immigration that I am familiar with to America. So this is good to get a little bit of foundation on. I don't know how much I could possibly learn. Like, famines happened, they didn't have potatoes, stuff had to happen. But, like, maybe I'll get something new about this.
Which had by far the most nutritional value for the space they took to grow. Not super great that the systematic exploitation of their land forced Catholic Irish to subsist entirely on a single food staple for generations, but at least they're not starving. So, anyway, in 1846, the potato blight hit Ireland and all of the crops failed, so people started starving.
Lovely.
Cool. The thing is, potato crops were going rotten all across America and Europe. Ireland was just the only place where potatoes were the only option. But with the crisis at hand, Parliament acted swiftly to provide rations and relief to... No, I'm just kidding. Parliamentarians in London insisted that the reports of famine were completely overblown and refused to divert resources for aid. Help did slowly arrive, but it was...
The English, you don't deserve Ireland. You don't deserve Ireland. This is... I feel like they would have learned a little bit. I don't know. It just seems like there's always kind of a disconnect between the English and their colonies. They just don't seem like they're able to empathize very well. It was one thing with the Americans. You can say that we were a little bit spoiled, but I think we also had some legitimate grievances with the cracking down on existing governments and trying to put something completely different in place from what they had been used to for like forever. This is their whole life you're basically upending here. Then there's the Irish. You could go with like India or whatever. It just seems like a complete lack of empathy here. And if there was a little bit more, it makes me wonder how well the British Empire would have been able to hold up. Maybe a little bit longer. It could be possible. I think to a certain degree, a lot of the little breakup things were going to happen eventually for one reason or another, but that's getting into alternate history territory, and it's definitely not my speciality.
Predicated on putting Ireland through economic reforms to modernize their infrastructure. Yeah, because that's exactly what Ireland was asking for. Not food, God, no. Laissez-faire mercantilism. Way to read the room, guys. Eventually, the Blight passed and things slowly returned to normal, but not before 1 in 7 people died of starvation and 1 in 4 fled to places like America. This would be why New York and Boston have big Irish communities that materialize out of nowhere in the late 1840s.
And I'm from Rhode Island, so we're like next door to Massachusetts, which is where Boston is. So we have a lot of Irish people as well, it seems. I haven't seen actual numbers on that, but anecdotally, I know a lot of Irish people.
The more you know. And real quick before we move on to the 1900s, it's not a coincidence that the areas least affected by the famine were the Protestant parts. And if that wasn't bad enough, Britain was also busy shutting down the last remaining hedge schools that taught Greek and Latin to Catholic kids. Before this, Ireland's Catholicism had produced the longest continuous tradition of Greek and Latin anywhere on Earth. But God forbid kids who aren't Anglican be allowed to learn. Gross. So, what to do from here? Well, if you're the population of Ireland in the early 1900s, the answer was literally anything else, and that echoed in a call for home rule and their own independent government. However, Ulster was still fiercely unionist, and it almost looked like pro-union and pro-home rule paramilitary groups were going to start fighting about it in World War I.
Okay, I'm kind of glad we're getting into this, because the North Ireland thing, I never really learned why that was a thing. I was too busy trying to figure out how the UK and Great Britain and England and like how all those things were different, but there were some parts of them that were the same. And I was too busy with that to figure out, oh wait, why are they split, the islands?
One suddenly became a much more pressing issue. But on Easter of 1916, Irish insurgents occupied government buildings in Dublin, so the British Army shelled them into surrender and then executed the rebel leaders. This, you may guess, did not sit super great with the Irish public, so as soon as the World War was over, Ireland fought a guerrilla war of independence, and in 1922 it was granted home rule as their own free state under the British Crown. And in the late 30s and 40s, Ireland transitioned into a fully independent republic. Ulster, however, opted to stay in the UK and became known as Northern Ireland. The split between North and South came to a head in the latter part of the century, as Northern Irish Catholics still faced heavy discrimination.
Okay, I'm starting to find what I'm interested in when it comes to Ireland. This revolutionary stuff. It's cool and all, but I kind of am fascinated by the political divide between Northern Ireland and the rest of Ireland. I think that there being kind of a unionist thing there, and then there's being everything else. I think I'm starting to get an idea of the stuff that I find rather interesting. And weirdly enough, it's definitely outside of the time period that I'm typically interested in. So I don't think my interests are restricted necessarily to a time period. It's just certain themes really resonate with me, and I'm kind of down with 20th century Ireland. It sounds very exciting.
And their peaceful protests met violent opposition, and this erupted into the Troubles, 3 decades of insurgency, terrorism, and police brutality in Northern Ireland, as IRA irregulars fought against Ulster volunteer forces and British police to end British rule in Northern Ireland. After some 3,500 casualties, most of them civilian, the Good Friday Agreement of 1998 mandated that Northern Ireland could vote to unify with the Republic at any time they liked, and that there would never again be a hard border on the island between North and South. Whoa, God, not again. Whew, Criminy, even when Irish history lets up, it doesn't let up. Meanwhile, the Republic of Ireland enacted a series of
I guess
economic
so.
and political reforms to lift the country out of hundreds of years of poverty. And today, the people of Ireland are safer, richer, better fed, and freer to express their religion than they've been in centuries. It's distressing
That's
to
sick.
see Ireland so cruelly oppressed for so long, but it's inspiring to see the past century's reclamation of Irish culture and their long-deserved independence. In Ireland, history is never far away. The legacy of their centuries-long golden age is everywhere from the Celtic cross to the Irish language.
Before we continue, I'm gonna just kind of let him wrap this up after this, but I really want to know, you got any good book recommendations? I know I have a lot of Irish people who watch my channel, which I think is really cool. I'm glad to have an international audience, especially you guys. Any good Irish history books, maybe even like stuff more centered around like the early 20th century stuff, because that is really fascinating to me. And I think that's one of the great things that this video has done for me. I'm not going to be interested in all of Irish history. There are going to be elements of it that interest me less than others. I think I've found my area of Irish history that I want to explore a little bit further. So if any good books, let me know in the comment section below. Who knows when I'll get around to them. I have so many books I haven't read. But I'm always down with adding more to the wish list. So thank you for ahead of time. Thank you for helping me, which I know you will, because you guys are awesome.
And the painful memory of the Great Famine has motivated Ireland to become a world's leader in international food aid, and I will gladly
Sick.
raise a pint to that. In ancient Ireland, monks had to copy entire manuscripts by hand, but now it's never been easier to get instant access to a world of literature thanks to today's sponsor, Audible. With enough...
Okay, I'm gonna let the thing play through. Any audiobooks on Irish history, let me know. I'm gonna let the ad play through, and I'll give some thoughts at the end.
Victoria, Audible is the #1 source for all your literary listening needs. Whether you're walking around town, sitting on a bus, or just making some dinner, it's great to simply listen and learn stuff. For instance, if you want to know more about the Golden Age of Ireland, then I'd recommend this audiobook on how the Irish saved civilization, which tracks Irish history from the fall of Rome through its shiny medieval period.
That's not the period I was thinking
by
about.
Liam Neeson. Doesn't get much
for
more
real?
Irish than that. While you're listening, you can also
Might
tweak
be
the
worth it.
playback speed and save notes or bookmarks with a tap. Audible members who sign up get a credit for any audiobook completely free every month, as well as 2 free Audible originals per month and additional discounts in the store.
I miss
just in time
Audible
for the holidays,
originals.
Audible is offering a half-price deal for your first 3 months.
I mean, they still have them, but like I miss when you just got to pick 2 every month. It was kind of like a special thing, but now you can just get however many you want if you have the membership. Why am I talking about the ad?
Sign up with our link on audible.com/overly
I love Audible.
sarcastic or text overly sarcastic to 500-500. If you do, you'll be supporting the channel and getting a really good audiobook in the process. Again, if this sounds like something you'd like, head to audible.com/overly sarcastic and start listening today. Thank you so much for watching. It's rare that I get to do a full 2,000 years in one video, but it's fun to take a really big
they have
picture look from time to time.
Scotland.
Still, there was a ton of medieval history that I had to cut for time, so if you're curious to learn more, I really encourage you to dig in. And if you want to keep the conversation going, hop on over to our official OSP Discord channel. Links in the description, and I'll see you next time.
So Scotland seems like the natural next step, right? This is definitely this is definitely the channel that did the Beowulf video. I recognize the style. It was her, I believe, who did it, not this dude. I don't know what they are to each other. If it is just a duo, or if there's more people or less or whatever. I don't know, but I really did like this as kind of an overview of Irish history. I think this is always a good thing to have before doing like a deeper dive into a subject. This was a very good introduction. I'm not big into medieval history. Just the way that medieval history is studied it's just different from what I'm into. I think I'm definitely leaning towards slightly more modern Ireland. But there are elements kind of towards like the late medieval period that also were kind of grabbing me there. So I don't know. I'm gonna put some thought into this. I really do want to learn a little bit more about Irish history, but there's not enough time in a day. All right. Thank you guys for watching. I will see you guys in the next video. Leave me suggestions in the comment section below, and that's it. Bye.